Pope Francis had quite a bit to say about criminal justice in a speech that he gave to the International Association of Penal Law. And most of what he said, I think, is spot on. There are parts where I totally agree with him, but there's also at least one part where I disagree with him. So let's break this down in pieces. First of all, he condemned the practice of extraordinary rendition used by the CIA specifically. And for those of you who don't know the details of that, that's when we go into a sovereign country, we kidnap somebody, we send them to an extrajudicial prison, and he's against this, and he's 100% right to be against this. And in fact, I actually think it's kind of brave that he even brought it up, because I don't hear other leaders talking about this or mentioning it at all. At all. So good on you for that, Pope Francis. He also urged people to fight against the death penalty. Again, that's a point I totally agree with him on. I mean, I think I differ slightly from a philosophical or theoretical perspective, because I've always said that philosophically I'm in favor of the death penalty. If we had a world where we could get perfect information every time, I would be in favor of the death penalty, because I honestly think there are some people that are just beyond rehabilitation, and they're monsters, and they just want to do the most hideous, disgusting, grotesque stuff ever. We covered a story the other day about a kid who killed his mom because she interrupted him while playing a video game, and then he reached into her head, shook her brain to make sure she was dead, and then he raped her. He even said, like, no, I would do it again if I had the opportunity. Well, yes, that person... in a world where we always get it right with all of the information, that person I would put to death. The guy in Norway who killed, over 70 people, most of them kids, because they were going to some sort of liberal camp, that guy I would kill too. I mean, there are so many examples. If What's-His-Face survived, who did the Sandy Hook shooting, yeah, I'd have no problem. I wouldn't lose a wink of sleep if that motherfucker got it. So, philosophically, I'm in favor of the death penalty, but in terms of, in practice, the Pope is right. Oh my God, I cringe to even say those words, but it's true. The Pope is right. We can't have a system that has the death penalty because we're humans. We're humans, and oftentimes we fuck up, and oftentimes we don't get the right people. And even though a majority of the time we do get the right people, if there's even one person who is innocent that we kill, well then... that would, by definition, make all the taxpayers murderers because we paid for the execution. So why are we not as guilty as the person who actually murdered? We would be. We would be. So there's this massive conundrum, this catch-22, where if you have the death penalty and you ever kill the wrong person, then technically all the taxpayers are also murderers, and we should all be put to death too because we just murdered. So it's this conundrum, it's this catch-22, and there are some studies that show 4% of the time in the U.S. we get the wrong person. So that's insanely high. Even if it was 1%, that's insanely high. But 4% is beyond fucked up, because what that shows you is, oftentimes with these prosecutors, all they care about is their conviction rate. So honestly, they don't even care if they're getting the wrong person, and if it happens to be a death penalty case, so be it. There's so many examples. We've done stories, honestly, 3 or 4 within the past 2 years of people who were on death row and were exonerated, or one person we did a story where he was actually killed, and then after the fact we realized, whoopsie, probably the wrong dude. So I'm with the Pope on that point 100%. He also urged better conditions in prisons. Can't argue against that, especially in America. Maybe there are some places that have already reached a good level of that, particularly in the Scandinavian region. In fact, I might think they're even a little bit too soft on crime, because oftentimes these people have TVs and video game systems and a nice courtyard to walk around in, depending on, of course, the security level of the prison. So sometimes they may take it too far in the softy direction, but by and large, I still think that point is true. I don't want to nitpick. If we're actually civilized people, if we are not also savages and barbarians, then we should have a certain minimal level of treatment in these prisons where it's not like we're talking about animals, okay? We're actually talking about human beings. And, might I add, I'm of the belief that sometimes punishment is necessary for certain crimes, But sometimes it's only pure rehabilitation should be there. There should be no form of punishment, depending on the crime, but some things should just be pure rehabilitation, where you're only trying to get somebody to get back in society and realize how they were wrong and to improve their lives. And sometimes, by the way, maybe in most cases, there should be a mix of punishment and rehabilitation. But around the world today, a majority of the time, we're dealing with countries and governments that only have punitive systems, and they don't give a shit about rehabilitation. With the exception of course, again, the Scandinavian region and some European countries. But most places are more like the U.S., where we're just barbaric, and you just throw somebody in a fucking cage, and you're like, whatever, that's it, you're done, and this is your punishment the rest of your life. No, that's too far. So, in this respect, again, I largely agree with the Pope. Now, here's my slight disagreement. He called life prison terms, quote, hidden death sentences, and he wants to end those. Or that was certainly the heavy implication, that he would like to get rid of life prison sentences. Now, I should mention, what was it? The top human rights court in Europe recently ruled that life in prison without the possibility of parole is cruel and unusual, and you need to at least allow somebody to have the option of parole, no matter what their crime is. So what I'm going to say in response to this point from Pope Francis, where again he seems to be against the idea of life prison sentences, and again in response to the European Human Rights Court, where they said something similar, I disagree on this point. Now, do I think that life prison sentences should be reserved for the worst of the worst crimes? Absolutely. No question about it. Do I think that it's possibly overused right now? Yes, I do. There's probably a good case to be made. I'd have to look at more statistics and numbers, but by and large, there may be a good case to be made there. But do I think that we should totally get rid of that? No. Because I go back to the kid who did the thing with his mother. I go back to Anders Breivik. I go back to the person who did the Sandy Hook shooting. I go back to the person who did the Aurora shooting. We can point to so many crimes that, and specific ones too. There was one I always reference on the show, and I almost want to give a warning before every time I mention it. A guy who would stab little girls to death, and he could only orgasm as he's stabbing little girls. Another guy would eat kids. He was a cannibal. He would eat kids and then try to flush their remains down the toilet. When they came to arrest him, they had to crack the pipes, and intestines fell out all over the place. There are some crimes that are so brutal and so over the top and so grotesque, and the people are so clearly disturbed, and there's so clearly no hope of rehabilitation, that in those cases, it should be rare, but in those cases, somebody should get life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, sometimes people fire back at me and they say, no, Kyle, you don't understand. They're only saying give the option of parole, but in those cases, they would never grant parole. To which I respond, well, if you're admitting to that, then why even give the opportunity for some dipshit who's naive and thinks maybe this person could be rehabilitated? Why would we give that person the chance to maybe release a monster like that back into society? No, sometimes some people prove that they just can't handle it. They can't live in society amongst other people because they'll do these insanely atrocious things. And in those circumstances, sorry, but you have to go away, and you have to go away for life. So overall, the Pope was right on probably 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 5 points, but that one area, I do want to pull the reins a little bit, man, and I'm trying to rally progressives to my side on this, where it is true that the U.S. is too barbaric, too savage in our prison system, and we care too much about punishment, not enough about rehabilitation. That's all true. We lock up too many people. I'd end the war on drugs and release all the nonviolent drug criminals. But don't become the stereotype or the caricature that the dumbasses on the right make of you, where they say, oh, the liberals are too open-minded and they're too naive and flowery and too much in favor. They think they could change the world just by their thoughts, and they're not steely-eyed realists who would see a monster when they know a monster.